Hi, everybody. I'm Phil Roeder, and thanks for letting me share my final project with you. As some of you know from either my initial project proposal or the progress report last week, my mom died a couple of weeks ago, and then a few days later, my mother-in-law passed away, and so it's been kind of a long, difficult couple of weeks. Because so much of my time and focus has been dealing with that, I decided to make this final project around that. And so my mom lived to be 89 years old. She broke her hip early this year, and so I looked at capturing bits and pieces from those final months, kind of in three phases. One, the home that she lived in for 40 years that she and my dad built back in 1979, where she spent her final months at a room at a nursing home in a small town where she lived in eastern Iowa, and then finally a little bit around the burial and funeral. So let me pull back the camera and take a closer look at the project. I've got this laid out on my living room floor. I did prints, as you can see. Did a total of 30 prints because I'll zoom in closer and kind of walk through these quickly. But I did, like I said, 3 kind of segments in these photos, and I just kind of like symmetry, and so did 10 photos from each shot or each segment. I had these printed by White House Color out of Minnesota. They do good work and also fast work, and so and also affordable work. So that's who I used to make these prints. I went with black and white. One, I felt it was, given the subject matter, more appropriate, I guess. But I also wanted to look at, make sure that the color and tone and all was a little bit more consistent, which I felt like I could do with black and white better. So let me just kind of zoom into, hopefully these aren't, sorry, got a new gimbal here that I'm playing with. Hopefully there's not too much glare. I went back and forth on the sequencing a lot with these. Because there were 3 segments, I thought first of it being kind of linear, but I've tried to mix things up here to find some connections between photos from different scenes. I started off with this image, which is actually partly the reason I did this project. This is a bed in a nursing home, and my mom had 2 things hanging on the wall there that were personal. One was a crucifix that we'll see in a moment. The other one is that photo to the upper left corner, which is actually a photo I took. It's one of my all-time favorite photos, and kind of convinced me that maybe the photography around her death was the right way to go. So I led with that image. I went second with this. I decided there was not a whole lot of reason to be too coy or subtle, that this project has to do with death. I titled the project The Longing for Solitude. You'll see that at the beginning of this video and in the PDF. I don't know if we have to do a title or not, but I was playing around with some different things. That is a phrase from something from the philosopher Kierkegaard, from a book he wrote called, I think, The Sickness of Death. I'm not going to pretend to be a philosophy expert, but I thought that phrase was appropriate given the tone of some of these photos, and quite frankly, given how my mom lived her life for the last 13 years since my dad died, it kind of has been a life of solitude by her own choosing. So a little bit personal, a little bit philosophical, I guess, in choosing that title. I put these two photos together, just a little bit odd in that, there's this, one has a cord going up, one has a cord going down. On the left is my mom's last bed. On the right is one of the few things remaining at her home, which was my dad's old workshop down in the basement that had one of those overhead lights that you plugged in. And I just thought those photos played off of each other pretty well. I know we talked a lot about Robert Frank in this class, and I actually went back and kind of flipped through the Americans as I was going through these photos to look at his sequencing, and that book's a classic, of course, and the way he, oftentimes the photos would at first glance appear random, and then there'd be an obvious pairing, and so I tried to do some pairings with my photos. In this case, that one on the left is the view out of her nursing home window where she was for the last 6 months or so. This photo on the right is the view from her bedroom that she slept in for the previous 40 years. Just a shot of her closet at the nursing home. One thing I thought a lot about with these photos, especially after I shot them and started processing them, was the work of the great Mexican photographer Graciela Iturbide. One of her series of photos was of the home, and in particular the bathroom, of the artist Frida Kahlo. And there's just something, I think, interesting about photographing very intently or very intensely a small space and searching out those details. These are just, I don't know, I put these in sequence. On the left is the empty garage at my mom's home, and at the right is the wheelchair that she used during her final few months. Again, just kind of the notion of transportation, I guess. But anyway, with Graciela Iturbide's work, some of the interesting things you find left behind in some place. My mom's house, for example, was mostly empty, moved out and ready to go, but they're just weird little things left behind, such as, I'm not sure why there's a hand towel still hanging on the rack in a bathroom at the house. I did like the combination of these two photos too. On the left is the fireplace at her home. On the right is her casket at the funeral home. But there was just something image-wise that I thought went very nicely together when these images were placed side by side. Same with these next couple of images. On the left is actually a blanket that I think cost all of $5 at Walmart that she had two of because she was certain that one of them was missing, so got her another one. On the right is her tombstone, and next to that a blanket of a different kind, a tarp covering the dirt from her grave. So just a different juxtaposition there. I know a couple people like this photo of the open door, commented on it. I appreciate that. And I took this primarily because this is where this story started. This is where she fell and broke her hip on an icy day back in February. I mentioned just kind of odds and ends left behind, and when people move out of the house, these are files that my parents kept of every single bill from when they constructed the home. So we left these documents behind in the house for the future owner, so they knew its history and saw what went into it. And then the remaining photos, for the most part, just kind of go back and forth a little bit between the cemetery and things relating to the funeral. A little bit from the empty home. Again, just an odd artifact left behind, a barometer hanging on a basement wall. And then lastly, I closed out with these two images. I guess kind of a before and after at the cemetery. On the left is the day before her burial, when the gravedigger dug the hole, and it's covered there by a tarp and kind of a foreboding sky in the backdrop. On the right is the morning after, when I went back and of course buried and kind of brings the story to a close. So anyway, I appreciate everybody who listened up to this point, and sorry about the camera work here, but thanks for giving us a look and a listen, and I've really enjoyed the class, and I'm sure we'll see some of you again in the future. Thank you.